Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back our good friend Eddie Brill. Eddie, come on out.
Good evening, and welcome to this week's edition of What's So Funny, a show that talks about the funny with the people who make it happen. Our guest this week is comedian extraordinaire. He's been around for a while. You're in for a treat. We have Mr. Eddie Brill. And of course, your host, the one, the only, Mr. Guy MacPherson.
Thank you, Sam. Nice to see you again.
Yes, very nice to see you.
Eddie, thanks for coming in.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's kind of fun. You know, we're all kind of stuck on our own places.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, we're not all actually sitting in the same room. That would be illegal.
Yeah, it sure would.
We would go to jail.
Fun, you know.
Yeah.
Well, we probably can do this from jail as long as we did it before it lights out. I think we'd be all right.
Right. As long as we're not in the same cell as well.
True.
You are our second Eddie of 2020.
All right. First one, Eddie Munster.
First one was Eddie Ift. We had
yeah.
And before that, we've been doing this show since 2004. Mm-hmm. And we've only had two other Eddies, both of them you. One, a call-in in 2009. Mm-hmm. And then one I recorded about half an hour with you when you were in Vancouver in 2007. Right now, you're speaking to us from New York City.
From New York City. Eddie Ift and I were both in Australia at the same time. I used to work there a lot. And we did a show together, a TV show there. So Eddie and I know each other a very long time. It's funny, I saw him the other night. He was recording, some kind of, a lot of people are doing their comedy online now. Mm-hmm. And so I clicked and Eddie was online. And he usually has his wife introduce him, and she's into it, but they had a big fight. And so she was sleeping in some bedroom and he was performing for the dogs or something in the living room. Good old Eddie Ift.
Pretty great.
Yeah, he's good. So tell our listeners what Gotham City is like today.
There's a pall over Gotham City, and it's not because the Riddler or the Joker are here, but it's New York has sort of become another epicenter of this coronavirus, and it's seriously taking a toll on the city pretty big, and we're all stuck in our houses, our apartments, to try to help flatten the curve, as they say.
Yeah, it's kind of surreal, kind of like we're living in sci-fi.
Yeah, and there's an unknown to it that makes it so weird. We're, as humans, we're so scared of what's unknown, which is one of the reasons why we have organized religion. It helps us to quell some of the fears of not knowing what's going to end up happening to us. And now we're in a situation where we're in the middle of something, we don't know what's going to happen to us, and it leaves people on edge.
Mm-hmm. Even though in religion they don't really know either, they just believe it.
Right. It's very true.
Yeah. So don't you wish, like, times like this, that you lived in the middle of Montana like your old boss?
Yeah. I'm such a fan of New York City, and I think it's, an incredible place, and the energy is palpable here, and I enjoy it. And I also have enjoyed nature. I grew up in South Florida for a while in my life, so there's a lot of quiet and nature. Right now, my brother, who lives in New York City, he's leaving to go to Florida tomorrow just so we can get out of this craziness.
What?
Yeah.
You're allowed to just do that?
Yeah, there are flights going all the time, and you're able to get out. But I'm here with my city. I'm hanging in.
Is he going down for spring break, like a week late?
No. In a sense, it's a party of one. He's going down. He was born in South Florida. Our other brother lives down there. He just wants to get out. He works in the motion picture industry, gaffing films, and his film got shelved, and so he just wants to get out. He has a roommate, and before he goes nuts, he wants to go out and go be with people he loves and can be away from this New York City craziness.
This is one of your brothers that you helped raise, or that you raised.
Yeah, he's like my child, and so I worry for him. Say that again?
What's the age difference?
This brother, there's a 12-and-a-half-year difference. Yeah.
Wow.
We had we have different fathers. His father, my stepfather, we had, same mom. And my mom married my stepfather and had 3 kids with my great stepfather. And, unfortunately, my stepfather died very young. He died only 5 years into the marriage. Got sick 4 years in when my brother Keith, who we were mentioning, he was only 3. So since Keith has been 3 years old, I'm the only father he really knows.
Father, brother.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like sister, daughter.
Yeah. We've been talking about the coronavirus, your stepfather dying. It's been a uplifting show so far.
Yeah, it's great. Hallelujah. And organized religion.
But we're going to also talk about comedy because, we need distractions as well. And comedy is real and it's distracting. But I want to say, first of all, I watched an episode, your latest episode that dropped today, called the OG. What is it?
OG Talk.
OG Talk. And that's, of course, about Toronto Raptors power forward OG Anunoby. Talk about him every episode.
And we shoot around, and Judy Gold and I both were on the interview, and we're both tall, and ex-basketball players, so worked out beautifully.
Yeah, no, OG is for Organic Grill. This is a restaurant, and it's all vegan or vegan, and So, but it was interesting because I jotted down some topics that I wanted to talk about before today when I watched that episode, and you brought up this very topic. Although, we could talk more about it. I was wondering what you think about late night TV now. I mean, you worked for how many years on Letterman?
I was there for 17 years. 17
years.
Yeah, I started in February of 97, and I left in February 2014. And, before that, I worked warmed up the Dana Carvey show, which was too smart for television back then. Hilarious, great. And unfortunately, people didn't want to think, or people didn't want controversy or edginess. And, a lot of people pretend that they're quote unquote woke, but they want, most people need safe. Again, that's why we have such nervosity, so to speak, right now with things that are not safe. But late night television has changed in a way that right now it's all political. Most of it is, Letterman, of course, talked about politics, but he took a very middle of the road stance, despite what a lot of people think. By being in there, if someone on the right, was stupid, he made fun of them. If someone on the left was stupid, he made fun of them. But the main gist of the show wasn't politics. And now it's become more political. Like the Colbert Show, which took over as the Late Show. He'll talk only about Trump in the monologue.
Yeah.
And while the jokes are funny in a sense, or clever, or biting, it's only about Trump, and it's kind of boring, kind of annoying.
Do you think?
I think so.
No,
go ahead, Sam.
Do you think that that's led to even like regional kind of divisions in late night TV consumption? Because you always know, like Letterman and Leno would play this kind of apolitical role. Their monologues would be relatively apolitical and would connect somewhat with Middle America. Is that the case now with Colbert, Seth Meyers, etc., who have such kind of heavy politics throughout the monologue?
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. I thought Leno was safe. Leno, incredible comedian.
Yeah.
He never, he still is an incredible comedian. I got to work with him not long ago.
Oh, he's a murderer.
He's just incredible. He's just phenomenal. But he never took a side. He was afraid to. He wanted to please people. He was a pleaser, which is really the opposite of what great comedians do. Great comedians, have their truth, and they, Carlin and Lenny Bruce and Lily Tomlin and on and on and on through today, Dave Chappelle, they're not here to please you. They're here to tell you their truth, where Leno didn't do that in late night television.
No,
but it was safe. He could dance around this middle of the roadness, which weirdly enough, angered a lot of comedians because they wanted him to be the Leno that they knew in his stand-up days. Letterman, on the other hand, he, was dark in a sense and biting and sarcastic, but also silly and fun. It was a good combination for me. That's why I and a lot of comedians sort of leaned toward what Letterman did. The same thing what Carson did. The same thing maybe that Jack Parr or Dick Cavett had done.
So you're biased, but you
yeah, totally.
Dave is the best ever.
I think Johnny Carson was the best ever. I think Dave was the Johnny Carson for my era. I thought Steve Allen was amazing.
He was my favorite. I mean, I'm too young to have ever seen his talk show, but just as an all-around talent, I thought he was amazing.
Yeah, and a great songwriter, quick on his feet, inventive, just amazing. I thought, so along the way, there have been some amazing broadcasters, and I think Letterman was the last of the great broadcasters.
Well, he saw
Ernie Kovacs. I'm sorry, but Ernie Kovacs was another bizarre, forward-thinking, late night sort of comedy host, and you could see the influence of Steve Allen, Johnny Carson, and Ernie Kovacs in Letterman.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Letterman grew up as a broadcaster from that perspective, or from that kind of path, not straight stand-up. Is that right? If I got my facts right. So, to have that kind of lineage makes sense.
Right, and that's, it's a certain kind of person who's a broadcaster, and that's why I see Dick Cavett the same way, being, one of the geniuses in, in fact, Dick Cavett would have a lot of things that no one else had. He had a show where he started with music. Like if he had Sly and the Family Stone on or Jimi Hendrix, they would be the first guest. The other thing was he is the show where, I'm trying to Katharine Hepburn or Marlon Brando, they would come on Dick Cavett and discuss their lives and their careers, where they didn't really do those kind of people. Robert Mitchum, they didn't do the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson or Steve Allen or Jack Parr or David Letterman.
Do you get Amazon Prime, Eddie?
I do, yes.
Yeah, have you seen, they have full episodes of Carson?
Yes, I have seen that. It's
everyone has Joan Embry from the San Diego Zoo or various animals, but you get to see the monologue, the desk bit, and the guess. And, I loved Carson. I watched him all the time, but I think he's a bit mythologized, or the show is rather, because I always thought his monologues were not good. And most of his desk bits were terrible.
I thought his skits were funny.
I never liked those.
Yeah, that's funny. But I don't remember. I don't really watch Johnny like you're doing, going back to Amazon Prime to watch him. In my mind, I was a young kid, and I think maybe like you said, I mythologize. I apologize for mythologizing. So that was kind of fun for me to see. When he do the silly sexual, sort of character.
Yeah. And with one of those busty blondes.
Right.
Forget her. Carol Wayne.
Carol Wayne, that's right.
Yeah. I know. I went to a Carson taping. Did you ever?
For me, I used to work across the hall, literally about 5 feet. My first warm-up job was for Saved by the Bell.
Ooh.
I know. It was like babysitting. It was a very young audience. And
did you teach Screech how to do stand-up?
No, someone has to.
Someone has to go out there, and I was there at the very first year, and they were all really young kids, and and the only person I really can relate to in the audience, and I wish I remember her name, but the guy who plays Belding, the principal, and his name slips on my mind, and I feel so bad that it does. Dennis. Anyway, his girlfriend was a great actress who was in the comedy series Fridays late at night, and I wish I had a research paper around. But she was always in the audience and always would look at me and laugh. And it was the one adult in the room that I could work to. Yeah, Dennis Haskins
Dennis Haskins.
played Belding.
Well, you have a great memory, and I love your stories. We're going to get to some more of them. First, though, we got to put you to work here. If you could just scroll down to the bottom of the page there and read that.
Okay. This is Eddie Brill, live from New York, and you're listening to What's So Funny on CFRO Vancouver Co-op Radio on 100.5 FM.
Oh, man, listen to that voice.
You're a professional.
I went to school that's why I went to college to do.
Did you? To broadcast?
Yeah, I was, loved sports, was announcer in high school. I went to South Broward High School in Hollywood, Florida, and I did the games as Broward Cosell, doing a very bad Howard Cosell impression when I was a kid. And, but I got press, and it really excited me. And so I went to school to study broadcasting. I had a fantastic broadcast journalism teacher, but at the same time, I had met a bunch of very funny people: Stephen Wright, Dennis Leary, Lauren Dabrowski, all these incredible people. We formed a comedy group, and my love for comedy won out over my love for broadcasting. In 1978, when I was in college, there was a blizzard in Boston. And the blizzard was like 108 inches of snow. And we were stuck, and the Army had to come in and all that kind of stuff. But I was working next door to the radio station. So I was stuck only a few feet from the radio station. And I had a work-study job as a receptionist at the all-girls dormitory, which sounds a lot cooler than it was. It was a lot of fun, but I was the big brother more than the guy that they said, we want to sleep with him. Oh. And it's all right. I enjoyed it nonetheless. But then no one can get to the radio station. So they called me and said, look, can you go do the whole news show, because we can't get anyone. So I had to do news, sports, and weather. So I'm the only one on the air. There's an engineer in there. And so I did 3 different voices. I was like, and now the news. And I talk like this. And the news guy. And blah, blah, blah. And then I went to sports. And I went, okay, it's sports now with this guy. And the Bruins today are playing the Canadians. And then I went to the weather guy. It's currently 25 degrees in Boston. And I did the whole show like that. And I thought, well, you know what? I think I have more fun playing than being a broadcaster. So
right. Was that at Amherst?
Emerson,
right? Yeah. That's right. Emerson. Yeah. A lot of comics went to Emerson, didn't they? Yeah.
Before we were there, Leno went there. Andrea Martin, Bill Dana, who was Jose Jimenez, incredible man who was great. Norman Lear had gone there. A lot of very funny people had gone there.
Did you graduate with Norman Lear?
Not that old, but I did meet him. My sophomore year in college, we had a comedy group. We weren't getting a lot of support from the school, and there were so many great graduates. There was a Marilyn Suzanne Miller, who was the great comedy writer and the head writer of Saturday Night Live at the time, had gone to Emerson, and we were, Jerry Paris. The actor and Dick Van Dyke had gone to Emerson. Bill Persky, who produced the Dick Van Dyke Show, was there. And so there was all these incredible Emerson graduates. Harvey Miller, who wrote the Odd Couple series, the famous television show.
I love that show.
And I met Norman Lear, and I said, look, we have this comedy group. We're very successful among the students, but we're not getting support from the faculty. And he said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, we'd like to meet some of our alumni and get to learn about the industry. So the next day he donated money to the school, and the school matched it, and they formed the first comedy writing department ever.
Oh, wow.
And because of my chat with Norman Lear, we started a comedy program at Emerson. So then people started coming to Emerson for comedy, including right away it was that David Cross came, and then Bill Burr and Anthony Clark and Laura Keitlinger and Jennifer Coolidge, and on and on and on and on. And Emerson has become a comedy. You can go now. You can literally get a major in comedy writing there at the college.
Wow. Thanks to Eddie Brill, our guest today.
Yay!
Yay, you.
Hooray!
Hey, so you spent most of your career in the Northeast of the U.S. And you've been around a long time. So did you ever try or any connection to SNL? You mentioned SNL just a second ago.
It's interesting. I didn't at the time, and that's how I kind of started in a comedy group doing improv. And I don't know why stand-up was so much fun. I was running a comedy club. I fell into an Emerson guy. A guy graduated. Came to me and said, "Hey, they need someone to start a comedy club. Will you run it?" So I did. In 1984, I took over this cabaret room and turned it into a comedy club called the Paper Moon, and it was wildly successful again because I was bringing in the comics who were not in the clique of New York City, who weren't getting work there. Paula Poundstone and Jake Johansson and all the Boston comics, Leary and Tony V and Bobcat Goldthwait, and it's bringing in Lou Schneider from Chicago and Monica Piper from L.A., Stephen Pearl from San Francisco. And so I was bringing in these major headliners. Then Dennis Miller found out about the club, and he would come in on Friday nights, the night before he did SNL. So I really started loving the stand-up. And as time went on, I went over to England to go work there. And I fell in love with working in Europe. So the stand-up was more the thing for me. Although looking back, I like, why didn't I just give it a try?
Give it a try. I mean, there were other stand-ups who made it on there.
Yeah.
Norm Macdonald.
Dennis Miller.
One of the greatest stand-ups ever.
Yeah, Dennis Miller, yeah. I love you dropping all these names, many of which I know, some I don't know, and that'll go twice for our listeners as well. Here's a question for you.
Sure.
What do Eddie Brill, Andrea Walker, John Wing, and Arnez J have in common?
I just, it's funny. John Wing and I were talking the other day, and you said Amazon Prime. We watched a video that we were all on this Comedy Club Network show.
That's it. I watched you today.
And all that hair.
1990.
A horrible mullet haircut 30 years ago.
What a suit, though.
Oh my! It was so horrible. I wish I had a girlfriend at the time who was, or a friend who was a guy or a girl who would say, "What are you doing? Why are you? Who are you? Some glorified, glitter rock and roll waiter? I don't know what I was wearing and who made the choices." But
lots of laughs in your set. I really enjoyed it, especially when you got to talking about the English language.
Yeah, it's funny. I hadn't seen that routine in 30 years, and there was a bit in there that I said, "Oh wow, I don't remember that bit," and I wrote it down, and I'm working on getting it, redoing it for now. And
which was
about
the bit?
Cross, about why
the
letter X.
Yes.
And I don't remember
10 different uses for X.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the line, "It's all well and good." That was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So you got the connection there between all of you at the time. Comedy Club Network, that was running where? HBO or Showtime?
Showtime.
Yeah. I saw Brad Upton on there and mentioned it on Facebook, and he was like, "Where did you get that?" And he said, of course, he sees no money from it. And that's the problem. Amazon Prime is running all these old shows and nobody gets any residuals.
Yeah, I know. There was years and years ago, Robert Schimmel and I were working down in the Cayman Islands, and he asked me to open up for him right after that gig in New Jersey. So we get to New Jersey. I don't have my luggage. All I have is this. We're very tan because we're in the Caymans, and I have this, shirt that goes down to my navel. I'm wearing a gold chain. I have my mullet, and I do this bit, and we get there, and they say we're doing a TV taping for New Jersey cable, and we were like, what? And I didn't know they had to put a set together. And they said, "Yeah, don't worry about it. No one's going to ever see it." Well, that didn't happen. Years later, Comedy Central became the Comedy Channel. and they didn't stop running it. And I never got more crap in my life for looking like, I was a real Brooklyn Guido, which in a sense I was anyway.
I got to
Yeah,
ask,
but go ahead.
you worked with Schimmel, one of my absolute favorite comedians. Is a friend of yours?
Yeah, he took me in like he was the older brother I never had. And
Oh,
he
wow.
took me on the road with him, put it in his contract that I had to work. I opened up for all his comedy specials. He was really good to me. And then he gave me his place in LA, and I split that with him and lived there for a long time. I loved him like crazy. I miss him every day.
Mm-hmm.
You not just all these comics that you've worked with over the years, some of whom have become huge stars today, others maybe no one's ever heard of. But then, working on Letterman for 17 years, you got to meet a lot of celebrities. Were you still a fanboy at heart, or is it demystifying seeing them?
I was so thrilled every time. And, I met my heroes. My father's favorite comedian was Don Rickles, and I met Rickles there, and Rickles and I became very close, which was very surreal. And Rickles talked about me on the air one night and said, "Oh, I love Eddie Brill." It's a short version of a very cool, long story. But he said, "I love Eddie Brill." And it made my father's life that his hero said that he loved his son. It was crazy. I met Sophia Loren, who was everything to me as a young boy growing up. Everyone in my era had the Farrah Fawcett poster with the nipples, poking out. And I had the Sophia Loren poster, so I got to sit in the green room with Martin Mull, and I got to hang out on the piano bench with Burt Bacharach, and on and on and on. The craziest, amazing. And, I became very close with Dick Cavett. And he brought me on a tour of the Sullivan Theater and showed me where Edge stood and where the Beatles stood. And, it was crazy, crazy. And that theater itself was so magical. It's like a shrine for all the incredible acts that were there. And to be on that stage every night for 17 years, I'm still humbled by that experience.
Yeah, and to meet them all, though, don't you then just... I mean, you still admire their work, but you see them as just regular people as well.
Yeah, they were all nervous to be on a television show. Not all, but they were all they're getting ready to be on television. They want to be good at what they do, and it was really nice to see people in their own element. And and most people were very nice. It was very, very wonderful people who were excited, who respected the show, respected Dave. And we're very excited to be on the show. So it was kind of fun. And in fact, when Dave was sick, he had shingles and he was out for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of, I got to go to the desk in every commercial break with Dave, which was another whole thrill. It was like being invited to a very intimate party.
Why? Why would you go there? What would he need?
Myself and Bill Sheft, who was one of the writers there. It was just that we were close to Dave. We were comedians, and we would have chats either about what would go on in the next segment. We'd, maybe sort of business, or we talk about the Beatles, or we talk about sports, or we just, we have a lot of fun to sort of, be interesting and keep everybody loose and keep everybody sharp. And sometimes, Dave was very inquisitive about the world around the guests, and he would ask questions about what should I say, or I remember when McCartney was on, he had asked suggestions for what we, can bring up. Mm-hmm. It was just really fun and thrilling to be there. And then when Letterman was out, I got to be up at the desk with all the guests to sort of give them that, freedom if they needed someone to talk to and or to relax them a little bit. And one of the shows was Elvis Costello, who's my musical hero, and to be able to spend the evening, standing and chatting with Elvis and making him smile and making him comfortable. I never forget how incredible that was, that experience. And it sounds like I'm name dropping, and I am in a sense, but I just happen to be lucky enough to be able to have a life where I spend a lot of time with these people.
Mm-hmm. Well, here in Canada, we call Elvis Costello Mr. Crawl. Diana Krall.
Oh, I got you. Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't blame you. Yeah, she's amazing. She was on the show more than he was, I think, and with good reason. Boy, oh boy, she was the nicest, and she just blow you away,
Yeah, they still live here in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Or they at least have one of their places here in Vancouver. Don't think I'm going to let this just pass by, Eddie. You said earlier on when you're talking about meeting these people, quote, most people were very nice, unquote.
All right. A few people were very, the nicest person was Lyle Lovett. We all voted, in a sense, not really voted, but he remembers everybody's name, and he was just a sweet man, and we loved having him on the show. It was always a pleasure having him on the show. There were very few people who weren't really nice. I would say two, and I don't want to say it as much as you guys would want me to say who they are. It's just not fair to those people.
Yeah, you can't fault me for trying, though.
Yeah, no, not at all. I'll tell you off the air.
Okay, great.
Great.
Oh, look, it's that time again. Hang on, we're going to scroll down to the bottom of the page. And how about...
All right, this is Eddie Brill from a bunker somewhere deep in Manhattan, and you're listening to What's So Funny with Guy and Sam on Vancouver Co-op Radio CFRO, 100.5 on your FM dial. Are there dials anymore?
Oh, nice.
Wow.
Speaking of voices, I got to work with one of the greatest voices of all time, Alan Coulter, on the Letterman show.
Oh, yeah.
Who I think Dave met when he was on $10,000 Pyramid, and Alan was working there.
I was wondering what he did before Letterman.
And he, of course, a million commercials and voices, and nicest guy on the planet, a sweet, him and his wife, just the loveliest couple. And he was hilarious. He Alan was willing to do whatever it took to get a laugh, whether it be wear a dress or, make a fool of himself, or he was willing to be vulnerable, which is the ultimate in comedy. And it was such a pleasure to see. But the reason I selfishly brought this up is because a handful of times he wouldn't be there, Alan Coulter, maybe for a holiday or a religious holiday or something like that. And on about 5 occasions, maybe, I got to do the opening. From New York, the greatest city in the world, it's The Late Show with David Letterman. And what was great about the funny thing, the first time I did it, I got so juiced up because in my headphones, I'm hearing the band playing and the crowd's cheering, and I'm doing that announcement because, look, I'm a fanboy of the Letterman show. I watched all the NBC days, which was before I started working there. I was at CBS. And so the director, Jerry Foley, said, when the show was over, called me and said, Eddie, please come down to the control room. So I did. And he goes, look, that was really great, but you sounded like you were 12 years old. We're going to have to re-record that. So please. So I went, because I was like, oh, it's the David Letterman show or whatever. It was just I listened back to it. It was very embarrassing. So luckily I was able to re-record it.
Do you have a copy of it somewhere?
What's that?
Do you have a copy of you sounding like a 12-year-old fanboy somewhere?
I think they got rid of it.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, it would be. It would be. I think out of the love for me and what's interesting, we all still see each other, the band and Jerry Foley, the director, and when we have the camera crew get together, and we're all still close. I mean, we're a family, and Letterman made it a real family scenario there. If we had to work holidays, Letterman made sure that everyone was a family. We'd have Thanksgiving. We'd always do a new show on Thanksgiving, and he'd throw a big Thanksgiving, feast for all of us. And, so we all stayed very close, and we're still in touch. I spoke to one of the cameramen today, Dave Dorset, who is, was the main cameraman for Walter Cronkite on the news, was Dave's number one cameraman.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh. And you mentioned Bill Shaft earlier, and he is also on the Comedy Club Network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Bill used to be one of the main MCs over Catch a Rising Star, so I met him. We did some road gigs together, and so he was nice enough to make it easy for me at the beginning when I first came in. Comics looking out for comics kind of thing.
Yeah. On Facebook, sometimes you write long posts on memories. I don't know if something just hits you and you spurs all these memories, and I love reading them. Is there a book in you?
Yeah, I just got an agent who's trying to get a publisher. If I can get a publisher, that would really be wonderful. I've written over 300, maybe now it's about 325 stories for my life, and it's really fun to do the research, to find out stuff, background stuff, and at the same time go to friends and say, what do you remember about this time? And I've been writing some stories, and each year I try to improve the stories. I've been doing it for about 2.5, almost 3 years now. I've always enjoyed writing, but never more than I do now. And as you get older and you keep doing it, you just can't help but getting better, or you just get sucky or whatever. But it's been a thrill for me.
It's also easier to do alone in your apartment.
Yes, when the world is falling apart outside your window.
Is there a story you find yourself telling the most amongst friends, or one that gets the best reaction?
It's a good question. Nothing pops out. One of the stories that is amazing for me was when I first moved to LA. I lived in LA and New York at the same time, but I lived mostly in LA, like sort of the end of 86 to beginning of 1990. So I had apartments in both places. I shared the one with Schimmel, and I shared an apartment in New York with Dennis Leary and Tony V. And rent was actually cheaper having two apartments, weirdly enough, splitting it with all 3 other people. And so I went to LA, and I had a very good set the first night. Luckily, I just hit it. And Sam Kinison approached me and said, "Hey, kid, you're really funny. I want you to hang out with me and my friends." And that started a lot of drugs and a lot of partying and a lot of fun. It was very surreal, but Kinison was a hard worker, and he really, when we all worked really hard in those days, and we really worked to be original and creative, despite all the partying and the drugs and the craziness and the hookers and not the hookers, the porn stars. I'm sorry, porn stars. I don't think you're hookers. But it was pretty surreal, people hanging out, but the creativity was really big. That was the first night. The second night, I went on stage, and I did an okay set. I was still hungover from my first big Sam Kinison party. And a couple came up to me. They said, "Look, we came to see the guy before you, but he sucked. And we thought you were funny, and we'd like you to do this show." And I thought they said for the Shriners this Saturday night. I went, "Sure." They said, "It's a benefit. But it's a couple $100. And in those days, $200 was $1 million. I was like, "Oh my God, yeah, I'll do the gig." And so they give me an address, and I borrow a friend's car, and I'm driving toward what I think is this, little hotel where there'll be some Shriners. But I misheard them. There was no GPS and there's no cell phones. I'm looking at this thing called the Thomas Guide, and I end up pulling up to this incredible theater, and it's the Shrine Auditorium. That's what they had said, not Shriners. Huh. The Shrine Auditorium was an 8,800 seat theater where they held the Academy Awards. So I'm like, wow. Am I in the right place? So I knock on the back door, and someone comes to me. I go, "Hi, my name's Eddie Brill." And, "Oh, Mr. Brill, follow us." And I had never been called Mr. Brill. I think only when my mother was mad at me, be like, "Mr. Brill?" And I don't even think she called me that. But the Mr. Brill felt really nice. I'm a young kid. I'm in LA. I go, they take me to a dressing room. I'm like, dressing room? And I'm passing the other acts, and the doors, the guests are the Coasters, the Shirelles, Jerry Lee Lewis, Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart.
What?
I know. That's what I'm saying.
Reading poetry?
Yes. And so I go and Eddie Brill, and I'm like, what? So I go in the room, and I close the door, and I shit myself, not literally. And I like, what am I doing in here? And there's nothing there except a list of the order of the show, and I'm following Jimmy Stewart, and I'm like, what the hell? So the stage manager comes in, and I go, "Excuse me, what is this for?" And it's a benefit, and we're raising money for the kids in the area, and the firemen and the policemen are putting it on, and you're replacing Joey Bishop. I'm like, what? Well, he wasn't, it's ridiculous. It's like, really? And I go, "And what does Jimmy Stewart do?" He goes, "Well, he reads his poetry." I'm like, oh my God. And the guy says, "Well, we heard that the guy before you sucked, and then he liked you." And I'm like, why is he telling me that? What? This poor other guy, he doesn't realize that he sucks so bad that people are talking about him. The other people know about how sucky he did. Anyway, so he goes, look, the stage is huge, and it takes a while to get to the middle. So when Jimmy Stewart is done, he's going to start walking off. We're going to start announcing you, so you got to work your way up there. So I'm on the side of the stage, and there was a comedian named Vic Dunlop. You remember Vic? Vic Dunlop.
Wasn't he an actor?
He
from
was.
Alice.
I don't know if he did acting work, but he was a decent stand-up. He was a very good stand-up, very good guy.
The eye.
Yeah, he had the eye thing.
Yeah.
He would sell the glasses after the show.
Yeah.
And he was a lovely man. And luckily he was there because he said to me, Eddie, I don't know if you worked a room this big, but you've got to be more deliberate with your act and let the words get to the back of the room and come back, because if you're just fast, it's going to get swallowed up, which was a great advice for me. So, luckily he's the MC and he's bringing me up, ladies and gentlemen. And, I had done one television show, which was the game show Star Search, back then. So this next comedian, and Jimmy Stewart's up on stage, go, well, I've never seen anything lovelier than a tree and flowers. And it's like fucking Jimmy Stewart. I don't know if you can curse. I guess you can nowadays.
You can.
I just did. And I couldn't believe it. And so he starts walking off, and I'm walking on, and I don't know what to do. So I give him one of those head nods, and he head nods me back. And I'm like, oh, my God. And I go out on stage, and, I have to do 12 minutes. That's all I had. Everyone's doing 10 to 12 minutes. And so I did 12 minutes, and I had a very good set. Thankfully, Vic had helped me, because instead of going, two guys walking down the street, I'm like, two guys walking down the street. That's how I changed it up. And it really, thank God, went so incredibly well. I finish, I start walking up, and there's Jimmy Stewart. He stayed to watch. Very, very funny, Eddie. And then Jerry Lee Lewis pushes him out of the way and goes, very funny, son. I'd like to take my picture with you. And I'm like, oh, my God, this is and I wish everyone I knew was there. It's like, luckily Vic was there to back me up on this one. It was just the most incredible night, and they actually asked me to do it again the following year. And it was just incredible. And years later, it's right after 9/11. Right after, it's October 15th. I remember, because my birthday was the following day, and my girlfriend took me to a play, and there was a benefit for raising money for the husbands and wives and children of the victims. And so Dennis Leary put it on, and all these great New York acts were there. From all the famous actors from New York were there. James Gandolfini and, Richard Gere, and on and on and on, Matt Dillon. And they're all raising money. And as I walk in the door, there's, Robert De Niro is about to walk out. I'm walking in. I've never met De Niro. Everyone else in New York has met De Niro. I'm the only person who never met him. He's walking my way, and I look at him, and I give him that, I don't know what to do. I don't know. I'm freaking out. There's De Niro. I give him the head nod that I gave to Jimmy Stewart, because I thought, and he looked at me, stopped, and then gave me the greatest hug of my life. And I'm not kidding. He held on to me, and my friends had noticed I would walked in, and they waved to me, and they looked at me like, who? Everyone in the party stopped. Who's this guy that we don't know that De Niro is making love to on the floor of this party? And, and it was just, so that head nod really worked for me in both of those cases. There's more to the story, and on and on and on, but those are the kind of stories.
People can read about that in the upcoming book. Do you have a title?
I wanted to, originally I was going to come up with Lies and Other True Stories. I thought that was kind of a clever thing, but people thought, just Warming Up would be a good title for it.
That makes great sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. How long were you in LA for?
Pretty much for 3.5 years. From the end of '86 when I did Star Search through sort of the beginning of 1990, there were too many drugs in LA. It was really fun, but I was starting to. I met a girl who lived in Connecticut, and I wanted to be back home with her, and I wanted to get out of that sort of drug scene. There was a friend of ours who had. Was killed in an accident because he was messed up from one of the parties. It was a big. There was a guy named Jesse Aragon who was a great comedian, a good guy, and we were all doing a lot of drugs. And he paid his life with his life for the drugs he had done. And I just felt like I wasn't, as much as I wasn't ever performing on stage under any influence, just the constant partying was just too much. It was, Kinison was a star, and we were, Kinison's friends, and I wanted more than that. So I got out of LA at the beginning of 1990, and I go back and forth. And my son, who's a comedian, which is another thing, is living out in LA, and I still love it. And my name's on the marquee at the Comedy Store, written in, chalk or whatever. And so I don't regret. I had the most. Before Schimmel let me move in, I lived literally behind the Comedy Store. So my living room was the Comedy Store, and every night I was at the Comedy Store, and Richard Pryor was there, and Roseanne Barr, and Louis Anderson, and all the greatest comics of all time, Eddie Murphy, and I got a great education living out in LA. And Mitzi Shore treated me like her own child, and I was very lucky.
What was her advice to you?
She had told me to make sure that when you do a short set, to open up with a quick joke of like at least 5 to 10 seconds, so the audience would, who didn't know who you were, knew that you would make them laugh. And she also told me, you remind me of a guy who worked here a lot named David Letterman. So it's kind of good. And I met Letterman out there very briefly. And years later, when I was working for Dave, I said, Mitzi said that I reminded you comedy-wise. And he said, oh, I'm sorry about that. He's always self-deprecating. So that,
Did you take any of her advice and then pass it on when you were doing workshops? I know you did some here in Vancouver. I don't know if you still do any.
Yeah, I do. I enjoy them. I started teaching when Emerson, I told you about Norman Lear, and we did we started having people come into our comedy workshops and talk to us, and not only the great Emerson graduates, but also people like Art Buchwald, and all these people would come in. I had mentioned Marilyn Suzanne Miller, head writer of SNL, which was so popular at that time. I decided, Dennis Leary and I, because we were going to school there, they said, well, look, you put this together, you're going to have to teach. So I started teaching an improv class for kids, and I just fell in love with teaching. Now, you can't teach comedy. I don't believe you can. Comedy, you either have it or you don't. So I don't teach comedy or pretend to teach comedy. What I do is I do workshops where we all be each other's eyes and ears and give honest feedback. And the only reason why I think that's really good is because for two reasons. Is one, it's nice to get honest feedback, not like, hey, great set, or, someone talking behind your back. Honest feedback in a situation where I make it comfortable for people to do that. And secondly, when you give advice to people or when you give critiques, you're actually projecting your own stuff onto others and kind of learn from doing that. And again, when you're getting advice or critiques from other comedians, you don't have to take them. It's just nice to know how other people perceive you, because that's something you could never know without being in a very safe scenario. So I still create these safe scenarios for comedians all over the world to run these workshops and let them start doing them on their own. And I taught at Emerson for many, many years. I'm teaching right now at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania. I still do it. I really love that position of helping create and to make a safe space for comedians to really workshop.
I know that music teachers, even English language teachers, are doing now lessons online. Do you ever do these on video or anything?
Well, we're Lafayette College. We're going to have to do the rest of the stuff online, which is going to, we're going to see how that works. I mostly like to work either in a workshop group where everyone's in the room, or I work a lot. I do a lot of one-on-ones with a bunch of comedians, major, when I worked at Letterman, here I'm with Brian Regan or Larry Miller, some of the greatest comics in the world. And, I'm sitting there workshopping their sets, getting them ready for television. So it's become a really exciting, rewarding, and fun, process working with comedians and helping their sets to be better, to be their eyes and ears that they can't see. And also listening to what they have to say. It's very powerful. My first time on Letterman, I I was about to do Letterman for the very first time, and I'm in the airport in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There was a great comedy club there called the Comedy Cafe. And at the end of the weekend, I'm at the airport, and Joan Rivers is there, who I had met once before, years before that, who was working in the big theater in town. And I told her, it's good to see you, and I'm doing Letterman for the first time in a week. And she changed places with the woman sitting next to me on the plane. She asked the woman if she would switch, and she helped me with my first set. And she asked me to, while I was on the plane, she said, all right, let me hear the set. And I did it for her, and she gave me great advice, which was very much like what Jack Benny does. She said, make sure that there's a lot of nonverbal stuff going on. Remember that Jack Benny got his biggest laughs on pauses.
Yeah, and looks, just sideways glance.
Yeah. So she really helped me. And when I did my first Letterman set, if it wasn't for words of advice from different people along the way, including David Brenner at the time and Joan Rivers especially, my set was stronger because of it.
Would they give you tags?
People have given me tags before, but this was more about the set itself and the direction the set should go, and maybe the order of something, or taking out words that are not important.
Right.
I've learned a lot of that.
Yeah, and just advice like Vic Dunlop gave you.
Yeah, which was.
And by the way, I was thinking Vic Tayback.
Oh yeah, he was in Mel's Diner. He was the original.
Right.
Mel.
That's who I was thinking of.
What a great name, Vic Tayback.
Yeah. Hey, Sam, our sidekick Sam here is a very funny stand-up comic in Vancouver.
Well, thank
you. And maybe, Sam, here's your chance. You got a question to ask Eddie about the process.
The process? Oh, man. Well, I got to be honest, Eddie. I learned a lot from your podcast a few years ago, The Break, where you spoke with so many great comics about them starting out.
Yeah, how they got their breaks, what their childhood was like, because, as you, Sam, probably have a similar story, how you started out, who was the funniest people in your house. My mother was the funniest, and we always had comedy albums, and we were watching The Tonight Show together with Johnny and saw George Carlin. What was yours, Sam? What was your childhood like?
It was the comedy in my household was my dad watching the Larry Sanders Show when I was 10.
He's young.
Yeah, you really are.
I am.
Okay.
And
thank God.
Him laughing, right? And me getting no jokes, but knowing that that's funny. And there was something about it. And I look at still my favorite TV show right now, the Larry Sanders
Show. Oh, my God, yeah.
But it was, there's lots of comedy. And then when I got a little older, it was all late night. And by late night, I mean The Tonight Show with Leno.
Right.
That, followed by Conan in the late 90s, early 2000s, for me was just the best way to spend a weeknight staying up beyond my curfew.
And what was great is that of all of the late night people, Conan I respect so much because he put a comedian on all the time.
All the time, that's
all
right.
The time.
Yeah, well, Leno made it about him, his monologue more, right?
Yeah, Leno, who I finally met, like I said, I worked with him and Trisha Yearwood in a big corporate show we put together, and Leno was brilliantly funny and very nice to me. And but there was at Letterman, if you notice, the shot was straight. It was called the 3/4 shot from the thighs up, and it would be that shot straight on. And occasionally, if the audience laughed a really long time, they do a shot of from way in the back.
Yeah,
I don't know what that shot was called, but with Leno, you would see Leno in the shot on the Leno show from the side, which takes away the focus. The focus should be on the comedian.
100%.
And the thing that I didn't like about that shot with Leno is that as an audience member watching the TV show, you'd break from watching the comedian and watch to see if Leno was laughing.
Mm-hmm.
Where when on Letterman show, you would maybe hear Dave laugh, which often would happen, but you'd never see him in the background. And that's about giving up your power to let somebody else have the floor.
Oh, yeah. Conan did the same thing. There was none of that other shot. I mean, I notice right now, Fallon has the same kind of shot that Leno had.
Yes. I guess it's
Without
the Tonight Show.
That.
Also, it's the director. I wasn't at Leno, so I don't know if Leno called for that shot. But, the director, one of the most important people on a TV show. We were very lucky at Letterman to have Hal Gurney and James Foley. And it's funny because the two directors were like hospital terms, Gurney and Foley. But we had an incredible director, Foley, and he would, he made the shots, incredible. So I don't know about the Leno show, how the shot was, but the focus would be pulled every time you'd see Leno in the background. The first half of the show is about the host. They do the monologue, they do little bits. The second half's about the guests. You give it up for the guests. And once you make it by yourself,
I could see, Eddie, that taking a more generous interpretation of that, it shows the audience that this comedian who we've never heard of is really funny because, a great comic like Leno finds him funny. So we should find him funny too.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, why would they allow this comedian to be on the show?
True.
I mean, I had comedians I wanted on the show that not that, Letterman didn't like them or anything, but it wasn't his style. So a lot of people one of the hardest things about my life as the booker is here I have 4,000 to 6,000 people wanting to be one of 15 spots. And, and a lot of them, most of my friends and co-workers, and I had to say no to, people like Schimmel, who was, he wasn't right for the show. And that hurt me more than anything that ever hurt me in show business, is not being able to put him on after the way he helped my career. And I wanted him, and I couldn't get him on.
Did you find it hard to separate that professional responsibility from the friendship?
No, I took the responsibility to heart, and I vowed to be the comedian, the booker that I see how Freudian slip. I vowed to be the booker that I would want, and that was a mistake too, because I wanted the honest truth. I wanted to know why I didn't get on the show or why I got on the show, because I would audition like crazy for shows and I didn't get on, and they would just leave. So I made a pact to myself that after every audition, say I'd auditioned 10 comics, and great thing about it is I was a comedian. I'm on the road. So you didn't have to come to New York or LA. I'm coming to your town. I'm coming to Vancouver. And I'm not just saying it because we're in Vancouver, one of my favorite cities, literally, I'd say Galway and Vancouver, maybe Sydney are three of my favorite cities on the planet, and a great comedy scene in Vancouver. You go to these cities and you see these amazing comedians. And after the show was over, I made myself available to people, and I took extensive notes for everybody. And I'd say, here I am. I'm not going out to dinner or running off. I'm going to stay here till the last comic is standing. No, since the last comic is there. And if you want to go over the set, something I would want. But it turns out a lot of comedians just wanted to hear you got the show.
Yeah.
And when I was giving them critique, which I thought they wanted, sometimes they would be like, "Who the fuck is this guy telling me, what to do?" And you can't create what you want for others. But at least what I did was, I did for comics what I would want a booker to do for me.
And it's the how one as a comedian takes that kind of feedback is not saying you should do this, but if you want this is what I'm looking for. Was that the kind of perspective?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, and some people have such a hard time kind of separating that, right? I mean, who are you to judge this person on anything but what you look for when hiring them?
Right. Well, I got good at finding what Dave liked because I knew what he liked. So I knew how to, and there was a couple of comedians who was like, look, I said, look, you're amazing and you shouldn't change who you are to be on Letterman. You're not right for the show, but you're one of the greatest comics I've ever seen. That's happened much more often than not more than not, but it happened a lot.
Yeah.
And I said, someone said, well, how should I change my act? Like, don't change your act. Continue to be who you are. Just because you're not right for the show, there are other shows you're right for. I had recommended comedians to the Tonight Show that weren't right for Letterman, that I thought were right for the Tonight Show, fit their scheme a little bit better. I knew all the bookers at the other shows. We were, I try to be friends with them and to, let them know. I mean, I was selfish and I was lucky because a lot of comedians really wanted to do Letterman. So I had that freedom to be able to say, look, if you're not right for the show, here's this comedian. And it was fun. It was fun to give breaks to a bunch of comedians and to, but it's also frustrating because there was a lot of people I wanted to put on that I couldn't, but again, it's not the Eddie Brill show. And I was hoping comedians would, because it was the Eddie Brill show, I'd have a lot of stand-up comedians on the show.
Yeah. It would be like Comedy Club Network.
Yeah, it would be like that, only with a nicer jacket.
Eddie, our radio time is just about up, but if you have a few more minutes, I have a few more questions.
Sure.
I don't know. How are you and Sam doing?
Okay.
Oh, good.
Sam, did you want to ask me a question? We talked. I don't think you got a...
Not really.
I'm sorry
You're speaking
Okay.
great. I'm learning so much. Okay, one question. I do have it queued up. We're in a time, I think it might be even the tail end of it, where like the roast battle culture exists, right? Which I don't think, in my observing this kind of world, it's not necessarily good for joke writing and delivering it on stage in an environment that's different than that. What do you think these kind of niche theme shows do to actually your regular material?
Yeah,
Sam, I know you participate
I
in
hate
roast
them
battles.
to my core. I have a 0-7 record.
Okay.
Well, there you go. I mean, I don't love them at all. I think, as a purist in comedy, I think it's punching down and it's easy and it's just being filthy or going for the lowest common denominator, but it makes people happy.
Yeah.
Some people like it. Some people laugh, and it gives some comics exposure, and there's a lot of positive things about it. So, but as far as the talent, I don't find it, there is a talent in it, but it's an easy talent, a much easier. And again, I'm being a stubborn old comic, but I don't find them that clever. Although like the old roasts of the Dean Martin roast and all that kind of stuff, they were, when you'd have Johnny Carson and, would be roasting people and, so many great comics, Milton Berle at the time and Phyllis Diller and all those kind of great comics they'd really have fun and you'd never really hurt somebody. Where this one, you're really trying to hurt somebody. And to me, is that funny? Nah, it's easy. So I'm happy for the people who do well there. I'm happy for Jeff Ross, who, does all this stuff. He's a great guy. I've known him, since he was a young kid and since he was Jeff Lifschultz, before he had to change his name because no one can pronounce it correctly. But I'm happy that he's created this place for entertainment and given a lot of pleasure to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But as far as comedy, I'm not I wouldn't go to one or I wouldn't watch one. There's a guy in L.A., who runs a show called Kill Tony.
Yeah, and Tony Hinchcliffe, right?
Yeah, and I've been a guest on his panel a couple of times, and I really enjoy it because I'm the one guy who, even though everyone is kind of being a little, tough on the young comic, I'm the one who gives them, say, look, what you're doing is good. Keep it up. Keep going. And Tony likes that. Tony's really great friends with my son, and he's a funny, nice guy. So I like that version of the roasting. It's a nice format. It's not like a bunch of, people just shitting on each other.
Yeah.
They just recorded that here at the Comedy Fest, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
Sam. Kill Tony, yeah. Hey, Eddie, did you ever work Catskills?
Not in that vein. I remember going to the Catskills as a young boy, and there was a guy named Corbett Monica who my parents took me to see, and he did a parody that I never forgot of Yesterday about having a bris or having a circumcision, and it was like, yesterday I'm not half the man I used to be. It's like,
and then his voice goes up.
Yeah, right. And it was all puns on the word, but my parents were so embarrassed that they brought their young boy, and I only heard half of the song, and they whisked me away. I did a couple of the places there, but I wasn't really not a Catskill kind of comedian.
Yeah, what is there now? What happened to the Catskills? Is anything there?
I think there's still shows that they do in those places.
Really?
I mean, I think so. It's been so many years since I've done that. I've had more pleasure working outside of the United States, although there's incredible comedy clubs in the United States, San Francisco and Austin and Denver and on and on and on, New York, Chicago. There's just so many great clubs in America.
Minneapolis.
Minneapolis. It's just a lot of great clubs. But there's so much pandering in the United States as a comedian that I never noticed until I went to Europe. When as Americans, we're always like, hey, we're getting applause breaks on other people's what they've done. Like, let's hear it for the troops. It's like, well, why are you getting an applause break on the troops when they're the ones doing all the work? You should do, it's great to be here in New York. Or my favorite one is when comedians say, hey, give yourselves a round of applause for coming out tonight. And it's like, well, we've gone out before. We've done this going out thing, and we don't really need to applaud ourselves for it. You need to get a laugh or an applause break. Actually, we don't. Why are you getting applause breaks? We don't want applause breaks. We're comedians. We want laughs. And but people are doing that because they think that it's really sad, actually, to watch the amount of pandering. Like, I did my Comedy Central special. I'm embarrassed by it. It came out in 2003 because all I did was pander at the beginning of the show. It was after 9/11. I did New York's the greatest city, and I'm embarrassed by. I'm just as guilty as anybody else. But going to Europe, like the first time I went to England, the MC, I went up to him to compare, and I gave him my intro, and he looked at me like, "Fuck you," and I didn't understand. I didn't understand that. Later in the week, we got close, and I said, "Why were you such a jerk at the beginning?" He says, "Well, you came up and started bragging about your career." I go, I wasn't bragging about my career. I was giving you my intro. He goes, intro? Why would you set yourself up and tell the crowd how great you are? The crowd will know you're funny if you go out there and be funny. And it was like, oh, wow. So they don't do that. Let's give a hand for. In fact, my first line out of my mouth when I was in London auditioning at the Comedy Store, I said, it's great to be here in London. And it's such an American thing. And he goes, some guy in the audience, bullshit. And I was like, and then I said, yeah, you're right. It smells like shit. And, everywhere it's stench of urine. And the crowd cheered, luckily, like, okay, he understands that that's a stupid thing to do. So,
right.
it's kind of interesting how much pandering there is in America. And so I've really learned more working in places like England and Ireland and places in Canada and around. It's, not saying America is lousy. I love it here. I love New York so much. But comedy-wise, the real test has always been going to a different culture and seeing if you can make people laugh. I worked in Bangladesh to all Bangladeshis. I worked in Amsterdam to where English is their second language. You learn a lot about humor and expression and the way to use verbal and nonverbal terms by working outside your comfort zone.
The universality of comedy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's something I was thinking about. Everyone is influenced, consciously or unconsciously. Even friends start sounding like each other. So with all the great original comedians, we can often hear where they came from, their influence, right? Mm-hmm. Do many or any comics stand out to you as having no real discernible predecessor? Like where you just go, where did this come from?
No, I really don't. I don't, like Stephen Wright and I are great friends still to this day and college buddies, but he was influenced by other comics himself. We talk about it all the time. And, you look at Mitch Hedberg or Margaret Smith or some of these other great sort of dry one-liner kind of comedians. They're all influenced, and you look at Jackie Vernon before them. I don't know. Stephen wasn't influenced by him, but they're, all the different great comedians. Letterman you could see Ernie Kovacs and Steve Allen, when we talked about from Letterman. And, they asked one time before taping, who's your favorite comedian without taking a break. Letterman said, Jonathan Winters. I think everyone's influenced. I was influenced by Carlin. My first routines were like, I did the rhythm of Carlin.
Tell that. You can tell that just on the set that we talked about on the English language. Right. That sounds Carlin.
And when Carlin first saw me on Letterman, he called up and said, who's this comedian? And we got to know each other and became really close. And he was interested in me writing with him for a comedy special on language and stuff. He ended up, he said, I'd like you to teach my girlfriend to be a stand-up. And I said, but you're George Carlin. And he said, I'm her boyfriend. She's not going to listen to me. But just the fact that
Right.
Carlin had asked me to do that was, I don't need anybody else to say you're good or not good. I mean, just the fact that he thought that was pretty great. But my rhythms were Carlin before I came on religion. You know what I think? What's interesting? I think Dave Chappelle maybe is the first comic that I saw that just came out of the box telling his truth without. He probably had influences in the community, William Stevenson and other people that he talks about, and Tony Woods there, and also Pryor, who also was a big influence for me, and but I'm sure he had some influences. But I really believe that he was one of the most original comics to come out, and a lot of people complain. Well, he's doing this, he's doing that. Well, I always tell people he's not here to please you. He's here to he's here to tell you his truth. If you're pleased, that's great. And if not, turn the channel.
Who's the predecessor of somebody like Norm Macdonald? I can't figure that one out.
I know his influence was Letterman.
Yeah.
I know he adored Letterman. There was a famous Canadian TV show that Letterman was a guest on that I eventually saw, that Norm said he saw and really influenced him. I think Norm's
right, but you wouldn't get that from just listening to him.
Right, that's a very good point. I think Norm is one of the greatest, people and comedians in the history of comedy. No, very few people make me laugh as hard as he does. And even his most recent, TV special was just, boom, smash, boom. I'm laughing, and I've heard every joke in the history of comedy. Because of where I worked, and Norman just never stops, never ceases to amaze me. I got to work with him many times, doing weeks, like say in Phoenix or a comedy club somewhere here and there, and it's a lesson. Damon Wayans, although you can see his prior stuff, I think he's one of a kind. I look at Maria Bamford, who's one of my favorite comedians. She always has been one of my favorites, and I don't really. Can you see a parallel to an older comic in her? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, maybe I'd have to think like sketch-wise, because hers are very character-driven.
Right.
Yeah,
but I think she's one of a kind, and just brilliant and hilarious and great. Did
you see Norm's set from a week or so ago, all about the coronavirus?
No, I haven't. It's online?
Very funny. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Check out his Instagram.
I will.
Eddie, last question for you, and you get to ask it. It's, you've done lots of interviews, you've been on podcasts, you've been hosting podcasts. What's a question you always want interviewers to ask you, or other stand-ups if you're watching them, that they never do?
Well,
what's the missed question?
Honestly, I've been interviewed so many times that it's very hard for me to find out what, usually what I want is, publicity for the things I'm doing. Well, you guys talked about OG Talk, and I'm very proud of that. I'm actually doing like 3 podcasts. So I like that. I want people to tune in to go. It's on video. It's a video podcast. So it's very
I watched it. It was good.
And we've done 25 of them so far, and we're getting ready to do the 4th season. But of course, now we can't leave the house. So we have to wait on that. As far as, I think we've covered a lot of things. As a comedian, when you're not a young comedian, when you're a comedian, you're on the road and you have to do AM radio in the morning. Okay, we got comedian Eddie Brill on the phone. I'm Johnny Fake Voice, and and here's what I'm gonna do before we play some Led Zeppelin. Let's say something funny. So what they'd all try to be funny, and they tried too hard to be funny. So in order for us to get an audience, we'd have to take over the show. So we got very good at that as comedians. We'd have to take over and calm these people down, and at the same time be able to do whatever kind of act naturally. Like I prefer not to do like lines from my set. Like this interview, I wouldn't do any jokes from my set. I might talk about a joke or whatever. But from that kind of lesson, I've learned to, like, if I've been interviewed and I wanted something said, I can force the action in there. There's a rhythm. There's mathematics in comedy, and there's a rhythm in comedy, and you can control the rhythm of the room. You can control the rhythm of the conversation you're having. If it's not work, like this hasn't been any work for me, then it's the most fun I can ever have.
Excellent. Well, we really appreciate you being here. But what else you got?
Yeah, exactly. I had a nice dinner that I made at home, and I think I have to go back out in a couple of days to get some more food. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that, but
harder to get organic food now.
There's incredible produce stores that are open in the area. I just got to go out into the madness to get it, and hopefully not pick up the virus.
Yeah, and quickly, your other two podcasts are?
The Break with Eddie Brill. I did 11 podcasts. I stopped that series because for different reasons, I'll just say. But that's on all of the platforms. The Break with Eddie Brill. Mm-hmm. Dave Attell is one of my favorite interview in that segment. Stephen Wright. There's so many. Susie Essman. There's 11 great interviews. Alan Havey. Mm-hmm. The second one, I'm co-hosting. I've only done 3 with her. This wonderful comedian named Susan Korn. It's called Relationships Are a Motherfucker, and that's kind of fun. I did 3 of those. But the OG Talk is the one, Organic Grill. And there's people from all, there's a great interview with Artie Lang, who's clean now.
Oh, yeah.
Colin Quinn and we got musicians and politicians and anchor people and people from all walks of life, all Bobby Ojeda of the Mets when they won the World Series, just a bunch of people talking about, just being good to ourselves and being compassionate to the rest of the world, which is, I think, more important today than anything else.
Well, we'll look for all of those, and of course, your upcoming book. Just warming
up. If you're
up.
a publisher out there, I have stories, please.
Boy, does he have stories. Thanks, Eddie Brill. Thank Sam. Next episode, whenever we get that, we're going to be talking with Dwight Slade.
All right.
Yeah, in Boise, Idaho.
And they want you to say Boise.
Oh, Boise. Yeah. Thank you.
Which is funny because I said Boise, and they went, it's Boise. And I went, hey, we don't say New Jersey. So relax. Now I know how to say it. Stop yelling.
Thanks, Eddie.